Hello, welcome once again to Urban X-Files. My name is Keith. Today our video is about some haunted cemeteries, and the haunted cemetery in particular is Greyfriars Cemetery. Greyfriars Kirkyard is very, very old. In fact, it's hundreds of years old, and it has a very dark history, and it is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the UK. Now, Greyfriars began as a small herb garden for a group of monks, but that was taken away from them to serve as a cemetery. Now, through the years, the cemetery kept growing and taking up more and more land. Now there are about 700 plus vaults in Greyfriars, but it is estimated that this cemetery houses somewhere between 100,000 and 250,000 bodies. There was some plumbing work that needed to be maintained, and it revealed the presence of bones that were a foot beneath the grass. Now, many of these are unmarked graves, and they did belong to paupers and the victims of the plague, who were just dumped there and had no ceremony. They just needed a place to dispose of the bodies. Now, their final resting places just to be lost in the winds of time. Greyfriars also has a very bloody and violent history. Grave robbing was a big thing back then, and at times doctors who were in training needed human corpses to learn the science of the human body. So they would pay grave robbers to steal relatively new graves so that they could conduct their investigations. Now, as awful as this is, it's understandable, because the only way we learn from the human anatomy is to dissect the human anatomy, but an unorthodox way that was used back then. Now, for easy money, these grave robbers were more than happy to supply the need of fresh corpses, and often these was without consent of the families, who would go back to their cemetery and find the grave of their loved ones and pay the respect, with not knowing the fact that they were paying respect to an empty grave. Now, there is even more horrific reasons that grave robbing in Greyfriars is said to be haunted, and it comes under the name of George McKenzie. McKenzie was a Scottish lawyer and an outspoken persecutor and a murderer of the Scottish Covenanters in 1638. At one time, he had placed over 1,200 men in prison, and after 4 months of these 1,200 men being in prison, only 400 came out alive. These brave men had been tortured by the guards and treated like animals, and those that died had their heads placed on spikes at the fence surrounding the graveyard, and then were buried in unmarked graves. When McKenzie finally died, he was buried in Greyfriars, just a short distance from the prison of horror he established without his government even knowing what he was doing. Now, locals believe this so strongly, at one time a wanted man had hidden successfully in the vault because his benefactor was certain no one would dream of opening. Yet he was right, because he's still there to this day. However, there is plenty of paranormal activity that occur in Greyfriars throughout the years, but nothing was compared to the violent attacks that began in the late 90s. In 1999, there was a homeless man who was strolling through this part of the Cemetery in search of some shelter from the awful weather. It was raining and very cold, so he thought the best place would be inside one of the mausoleums. Now, out of all the burial vaults in Greyfriars, he chose the one that belonged to the McKenzie family. That's right, the same McKenzie family that tortured all those people. The man easily broke the locks from the vaults, given the fact they were very old. He stepped inside. No doubt, he was off-put by the pungent air of the musty stench that filled the mausoleum. But it was a refuge from the elements of outside. However, he made a very poor decision by opening up one of the caskets to use as a bed. Now, the poor decision to be in anyone's vault, but especially in Mackenzie's. Out of the 7 or so coffins that housed the Mackenzie family, the man chose the casket belonging to none other than George Mackenzie. As the man struggled to open the casket lid, he was horrified to feel the ground beneath his feet begin to give way. Now, unknown to him, the McKenzie Vault was built immediately over one of the pits where the plague victims had been thrown in. The homeless man fell down into a massive sea of human bones from the victims of the plague. He was screaming and terrified, and he managed to climb out of the pit to make his way out of the vault and run far away from that cemetery. Now, it would seem that he disturbed someone or something that night. Greyfriars had always been rumoured to be haunted, but never like it was after the disturbance from this homeless man that night. A few days after the vault had been vandalised, where this homeless guy tried to get some rest, a woman was passing alone in front of the vault door. She paused for a moment, and as this most unnatural feeling just came over this poor woman, because she suddenly felt faint and everything began to slowly fade to black. One of the cemetery attendants came upon her lying unconscious on her back in front of Mackenzie's vault. At first glance, he thought she was strangled to death because her throat was covered in finger bruises, marks like she'd been assaulted. Whatever happened occurred after she fainted, or was so horrible her mind refused to remember it. She blocked it out to save her brain from reliving this trauma. Now, that sparked the beginning of some very violent events in Greyfriars. Now, think about being there with a tour group learning about the history of Greyfriars. All is going well, and then something changes the atmosphere of that night. A terrible fear overwhelmed the people. Your heart began to pound, and someone else in the group feels very similar to how you feel, and then they collapse, they fall to the floor, and then that gives you the prime opportunity to escape from the cemetery. No questions asked, you leave. Now, there is a common happening in Greyfriars. People faint, they have accidents in the underwear, they soil themselves, and they run far away in terror for no apparent reason. Individuals have been slapped, struck, and burnt. They've even been cut. They've been grabbed, shoved, thrown to the floor, lifted off the floor violently and thrown across the air. People have had sudden panic attacks and bouts of nausea, vomiting, all for no reason. Now, there are plenty of strange odors that happen for no reason. They appear as fast as they disappeared, and others have had something gouge their skin to leave a bloody mark. Voices are heard throughout the cemetery, but there's nobody there. Now, others have felt cobwebs onto their face and they try to wipe them off, only to realize that there's no cobwebs there. In fact, there's no cobwebs in that area at all because it's out in the open. Now, something, it seems to have touched them, but it wasn't something that could be seen by the naked eye. Voices cry from that now empty prison, as the tortures that went on seem to have left a recording inside the building that replays that horror over and over again. People feel like they are being followed. People feel that something is lurking behind the next corner. We have even had people whose mobile phone batteries have drained from barely full to nothing. Something is draining the energy. Now, personally, I've had this happen, not so much in Greyfriars because it's a point I've not investigated as of yet, but I've found I've been in places where something just didn't feel right. I've gone to use my equipment to find that the battery, after being fully charged, has depleted. It won't start. This could be from my spirit box. This happened while I was with Exploring With Me Dave. Last year, we went and took a walk around Olive Mount, and we found a spot where we thought this would be. The air didn't seem right, so we decided to conduct a little investigation, only to find that that part of the building we were in, my equipment wouldn't start. Then didn't think much of it, conducted a small investigation and left. Then when I got home, I checked my equipment to find that they'd miraculously recharged. So that spot prevented the battery from working with no explanation. Then to find that somebody who watched the video that I made had seen where we was and contacted me to say that that part of the building we were in Olive Mount, was very active, because they would often hear people running across the corridor in the dead of night. Only that when the care workers had gone up to investigate, it was silently still and no residents were awake, with it being in the wee small hours. So what causes these strange incidents? Going back to Greyfriars, local newspapers have carried images of the aftermath of visits to Greyfriars, while any skeptic would probably explain them away. The people have been on the receiving end of these injuries for no physical explanation. Without a doubt, Greyfriars is extremely haunted. Some people insist that the entity is none other than McKenzie himself, but oddly enough, none of the psychics, the sensitives or the clairvoyants have visited Greyfriars have ever mentioned him by name. There is one spiritualist or exorcist named Mr. Grant who attempted an exorcism of whatever was in Greyfriars but did not succeed, and he died a short time later of a heart attack. Was this a coincidence? I do not know. Well, I hope you enjoyed this strange encounter of Greyfriars Cemetery. I have some Scottish friends who watch my YouTube videos and have told me about a few things in Scotland. So if any of you guys from Scotland have been to Greyfriars, then please let me know what you think of it, and hopefully sometime in the future I will be able to go and conduct an investigation there myself. But I will be aware and not try to exercise anything for fear of what might happen. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Peace.